Hey everyone, I wanted to make a quick video on a concept of what makes a deck good. I get this question, is this deck good? What do I get to legend with? Makes a deck good? And good is not necessarily an objective term. It requires subjective value judgments, and depending on what your value judgment's on, many different decks can be good. So then when people are arguing over the best deck, well, they often have different values of what it means for something to be the best, because they have a different decks to be good, because the best would be the most good. And if I think the most good is this criteria, and you think the most good is this criteria, we're going to have different points of view. So it's an interesting thing of reality is the best deck often can mean very different things for different people, but I want to go over things that I consider are sort of the key ingredients for what makes a deck good, and then let you sort of decide as an individual how important you think different things are. So you might think, one of the things that we talk about is win rates. You might think it's only about win rates, or it might be about fun. It's only about fun, and the best deck is the one that has the most fun. So you have to decide what your balance is. But yes, so I already said, what is the most common thing of what makes a deck good, and that is its global win rate. Global win rate, or even a contained win rate within a certain sample. So what you can see, this already gets a little confusing because different decks have different win rates at different ranks. You can see at Diamond 1 through 4, we have things like Mech Mage being a very strong deck, a 52% tier 1 win rate. Off the historical one is at the sort of lower ranks, which we don't have here on the Vicious Syndicate report, is the Quest Warrior, which is often does very well at the low ranks and just completely tops off. And that's even, Quest Warrior's gotten nerfed so many times, but this is even before the nerfs. Quest Warrior was very bad at the high ranks and often very, very good at the low ranks. But you can see here, Mech Mage does well here, but if you look at top 1000 legend, it's still doing okay. It's just doing a little bit less. There are some more egregious examples. Let's see if Quest Warrior makes this list. So Quest Warrior not even doing that good. Oh, this is Diamond 1 through Diamond 4, but I'll pull up HS Replay here real quick, and you can see at Bronze through Gold, Quest Warrior is still one of the strongest decks. But if you go top 1000, I doubt it even makes the cut. There's just so few people playing it. If we go legend, let's see if we can go legend. You can see, let's see if we can find Quest Warrior here. Let's go Diamond through legend. Quest Warrior. You can see nobody. Oh, here. So at Diamond through legend, it's still decent. You got a 50%, 0.1% win rate. And then as you just get higher and higher, the deck completely topples off. And what's likely is players play it and they do so incredibly poorly that they stop playing it, and there's not enough data to even sort of report on it. But let's go back to the Vicious Syndicate report, and you can see, certain decks perform good at the low ranks and certain decks perform good at the high ranks. So even depending on your local ranking, and this is top 1000 legends. So often you'll hear pros have very different opinions, because the top 100 legend meta can be a very different meta, reward very different things than the top 1000. So let's say someone says something like, there's often a Paladin has been a class that, maybe Mech Paladin looks really good even at top 1000 legend, but once you get to the players who play at top 100 legend, it can really, really topple off. What that can mean is that the Mech Paladin, like that, certain pros will just completely disrespect decks, and they'll say, I don't care what the stats are, this deck is garbage. And the hard thing is, well, if a deck really is good all the way up, to top 200 or top of this, and then top 100, we have so few people to use win rates on. So the reality is some decks, it's hard to find and then the players who do play at top 100 usually stop playing. So it's hard to get good stats on that very specific niche. Next I want to talk about another concept of why I think often the statisticians and the top 100 players will massively disagree on what the best deck is. And that is what I call skill expression. So the ability to outplay your opponents. So if I look at my current win rate, I've been playing the Murloc Shaman for a long time. I've been top 10 legend for a while. I've been trying to shoot for number 1. I was rank 4 last night. We kind of go around between 4 and 10. We didn't quite get to rank 3. You can see I have a 57.5% win rate over 127 games. That is a lot of games, and that is against good players. So what does that mean? I'm playing against good players, really top players, but I have a 57.5% win rate. But if we go to the Vicious Syndicate report, we can see Control Shaman on average has a 51.74% win rate. So I am beating the average by 6%. But what does that mean? So if I'm beating the average, and now I could have a smaller sample size, somebody else is pulling that average down. But the bottom line is, just because this is the global win rate, does that mean you'll be your win rate specifically? And if you want to beat the numbers, which I think you always want to be going for higher. Now, maybe eventually, what if you're at a low rank, what will happen is you'll beat the numbers and then your opponents will become better and better because the game will adjust. But after a while, there becomes less and less top tier players to play as you get to the absolute highest tier play. So if you want to just beat the numbers, what do you have to do? You have to play a deck that you can outplay your opponent, that you can make less mistakes than theirs, and you can have a higher win rate than the 52s or the 53s. Usually I find elite players, when you ask them, they look at their deck tracker stuff, they'll have a 55% win rate sort of overall. When I ask, some of the best players in the world, and they've done, I think Gabby had a 56% win rate. I have had a 55% win rate. Pocket Train, who's has some of the best ladder stats of all time, 55% win rate. I remember talking to Wet Goose, who is some of the best ladder stats of all time, and he said to get number 1 legend, you just have to play a 50% win rate or 7% win rate for a large sample size, and you'll eventually get it. So I think if you have I think one of those things is, if you're playing, so when people think, okay, well, how could somebody do well with, let's see, Quest Priest at a 48.78% win rate. But why wouldn't they play something like Big Beast Hunter or Celestial Druid or Control Shaman? But the reality is, to get that number 1 legend, you have to be beating that stat by 8 or 9%. So if one deck you can easily outbeat the numbers, and one deck you're just kind of at that number, I've always thought it'd be cool to have a thought experiment where if there was a deck that at least top 100 players could play, and they would have a 51% win rate against literally everything. From statistics points, it would say, well, this is an unstoppable deck. It beats everything. But really good players might say it's a bad deck. Why? Because they're not able to outplay their opponents. They're just gambling. And I think one of the big things, what makes a deck good, is a deck that has the ability to outplay your opponents, for you to push your advantage, and I think on the other end, you could actually take the reverse definition of this as well. So if you look at something like Quest Warrior, it actually has the opposite, where it's a deck that's very hard to make mistakes with, and it's very easy to do. And that's part of the reason why its stats are so good. So this is already, I'm showing my own bias of, I think a deck is good because I can beat the numbers, but somebody might have the opposite point of view, where a deck is good because it is resilient to differences in skill. You could play Quest Warrior and you can get to Diamond or get to Legend with very little Hearthstone training, because it has that, what we call it, the guide of, you play the quest, it tells you what to do, and you're likely to go to good tempo plays. So, but that's one of the things I think is one of the biggest hallmarks of what makes a good deck: skill expression. Next, I want to talk about the concept of meta resiliency and meta defining this. And I remember during the Naga Demon Hunter sort of meta, where Naga Demon Hunter, this expansion, was the best deck in the game. Let's go up and pull up a Vicious Syndicate report from one of those spots. So you can see here, and this is before Ramp Druid nerfs. but we had, Aggro Demon Hunter doing really, really well. Let's go a little bit to where we had the Aggro Demon, the Druid nerfs, and now we probably have Naga Demon Hunter, and Warrior being the best decks. So we had Warrior and Naga Demon Hunter being the best decks. And during this time, you had Boar Priest start to tune up. You could see it already, but it was tier 4 overall. This is even at top 1K Legend. So even amongst the top 1,000, it just was not doing very well. But I think there were players who would go and say, Boar Priest is the best deck in the game. And I would say, I think meta resiliency and meta definingness is a big reason why. But the previous example of skill expression, I think, is a very good case for Boar Priest being bad in the game. But the thing that really makes it not the best deck in the game, in my opinion, is meta resiliency. So if you look at this, you can see Aggro Demon Hunter and Warrior have some of the highest frequency scores. So 100 here is how much the deck was being played, and it was the most popular deck in the game. And then after that, you had Control Warrior. So this was at this spot of a very, you had Aggro Demon just completely defining the meta. Everyone was playing Aggro Demon Hunter. And it's a thing of Aggro Demon Hunter's deck to beat, and then people were playing Control Warrior to beat Aggro Demon Hunter. And then there's just all these other decks that people were just playing that just weren't making the cut. And what I think is interesting about this is, so players would do Boar Priest, and if they got really good at it, they could have about a 50-50 win percent against Demon Hunter and a very favored win rate against Control Warrior. And so because of that, they could, in a very high legend bubble, you could do really well with it. Why? Because, well, you go 50-50 with the Demon Hunters, which is worse than the stats. The stats would say it's not as good, but a very, very good Boar Priest player could do that. And they could just have a ridiculous win rate against Control Warrior once they got everything really precise. Boar Priest is a very, very difficult deck. So because of that, and when the meta is so much Warrior and Demon Hunter, there are players who really put the mastery into the Boar Priest who think this deck is, the strongest deck in the game. But I want to say Boar Priest is a meta exploitative deck, where Demon Hunter is a meta defining deck. So here's the problem with saying Boar Priest is the best deck in the game. So let's say we all agree Boar Priest is the best deck in the game. Boar Priest stock goes up, everybody starts playing it. And let's say even for this, people get really good at Boar Priest too. It's not just, it's not just like players get really, really good at it. They learn the stuff, and it starts to become more popular. Well, then people just start playing Alignment Druid and they farm it. It's so easily countered. There's so many things that just wreck Boar Priest, and the only reason that you don't see play is because Boar Priest is not meta defining. It is meta exploitating. And I think it's for a deck to be, in my opinion, the best deck in the game, it needs to be more on the meta defining this. Now, you can have an amazing meta exploitative deck like Boar Priest within the skill of the opponent, within the very tight meta, but I wouldn't call that the best deck in the game. But if you are a player, I could totally see you saying that. It has skill expression. You're doing really well with it. You're having great results with it. Best deck in the game. So you can see here already we have a really interesting spot of a decision of what makes a deck the best. And, like I said, there's not an objective standard for what makes the best deck in the game. But I think what's interesting is that you could see but I would not say, under my definitions, Boar Priest is the best of the game. I would say in this meta, Demon Hunter is probably the best deck in the game globally. And for me personally, Control Warrior is the best deck in the game because I'm a very good Control Warrior player. So that's what I would have the best results with personally. But when I try to say what's the best, I have my favorite, but I try to keep my opinion a little bit out of it, though I'm still going to be biased like the rest of us. I don't want to say, well, people ask me, what you think the best deck in the game is, and often it's like, well, this is the deck I like the most, but that's not necessarily the best deck in the game by my definitions. Because if I've played, for example, I can do quite well with Ramp Druid even in metas that are very unfavorable, but I've played hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of games of Ramp Druid, and I love the deck. So I can play it, but would I consider it a good deck? No. It's a thing of I play it anyways. So I think that's a big thing. The next, so we have meta. the meta defining, meta exploitating, and the concept of meta resiliency, where Naga Demon Hunter, despite the fact that it was the most popular deck and as the E had the target on its back, was still the highest win rate deck, is I think is a really good sign of that. It was clearly the best deck in this meta. But next, I want to talk about another reason what deck can make a deck good, and it's tournament viability. So just because a deck is good on ladder doesn't mean it's good in tournaments. So, and you actually have stats. So I'm on here on Off Curve's website. Really good for if you're looking to get into Masters Tours. I highly recommend it. And you can see you can go at deck win rate right here, and you can see the decks that are often are not the order of what the best decks are often not the same as on ladder. And you also have the element of decks being banned. Whereas, so for example, you can see Anaconda Druid does not actually have a very good win rate in these tournaments, but it also has the highest banned rate. So it's a deck that when you bring it, you'll either be, because it's so polarizing, it'll often either be banned or it will be played against and have a low win rate. So you can see because of that, that can change things. Another thing of why tournaments are way different is the targeting strategy. So for example, let's say I'm playing a lineup and I'm trying to crush one deck. Let's say I make a target Boar Priest lineup. Remember, Boar Priest in this, I'm gonna make a theoretical world where everybody loves Boar Priest. It's the best deck in the game. Why bring 4 decks that aren't very good to beat Warlock, or sorry, to beat Boar Priest? So I might bring Warlock, which is with Altars of Fires. So I can just mill the cards. I might bring Alignment. I might bring a bunch of decks that just annihilate Boar Priest but aren't very good at all. Well, what's interesting about that is because unlike in ladder where you play a deck once, if I beat a deck, I get to play it again. So your deck can actually have an effect on your other decks. So let's say all my decks crush one deck, but my other deck doesn't, even though it's a better deck overall, it doesn't crush that deck. Well, let's say I happen to lose, against Boar Priest, for example, with my normal deck. Well, now my other decks don't get the chance to play that deck. So that makes it really complicated. So they have so you could see they have some of the statistically best strategies. You could see, Control Shaman, Boat Rogue, Big Spell Mage doing really good. I'm going to try and see if one that I think isn't as good on ladder, I think, Anaconda Druid, I think we saw before, even though it has all the bans here, it doesn't have a very good win rate, which I think is a little interesting. That it's just not performing as well as the stats would say it should, according when we were looking at the Vicious Syndicate report earlier. But yeah, let's keep. So you could see sort of what are some of the best lineups. So let's see if we go lineup distribution, or we can go they have tier list, and you can see so you have some of the most common lineups here. And let's see if we can go tier list. And the issue with this is there's not as much sample size, but you can see how often players make it to the end. So you can see match win rate, so how often the lineup wins their series of matches. You can see some have but this has a huge amount of biases, and that's another really interesting about tournament decks. Is depending on what your goals are. So let's say you just want to have the highest match win rate possible. Well, you might pick decks that just crush the beginner players. You might pick decks that you always win your first 4, and maybe you get through to a Masters Tour with a really high win rate. There are ways you can get to Masters Tour besides getting first. But let's say you only have I need to win it all, and that's the only thing that matters. Well, you might pick decks that don't do as well against the beginners. So, you might still have an advantage on the beginners in the earlier rounds, but then you get high rolled once in a while, or, maybe they just outplay you. This beginner actually knew their stuff, and they knew their deck, and you didn't know that, and you lose. In the early rounds, you're less likely to get to the late rounds. But if you pick maybe a riskier lineup, then when you get to the late rounds, you might pick a lineup that exploits the most common lineup. So if you make it to the later rounds, you can often beat all the good players in the late rounds. That's kind of what I did in HCT Philadelphia, where I brought a lineup that I felt would really crush the good players. I thought the good players loved playing Druid, and I actually did worse in the early rounds, and then in the late rounds I just crushed it and absolutely won everything. So what I'm doing to say this is that just because a deck is a global win rate, just because there's a lot of more going on in tournaments and things get a lot more complex. So it's a lot harder to have a clear objective. This is the best deck. But I do think the meta defining and meta exploiting is another big thing. You might have a lineup that's really wins a tournament, but it was exploiting a certain meta trend, and then everybody copies it, and then it gets worse. So I would not necessarily say that's the best deck. You could say that was the best deck for this tournament, but that's because it was exploiting a certain trend. So I think, with this, you can see there's a lot going on in tournaments that it gets a lot more complicated on what is a best deck. And then the next reason thing I want to talk about is what makes a best deck is the budget. So decks are not all priced the same. You can see, if and I have some of these weird, if you can see different decks cost different amounts. And you can see, okay, like Curse Warlock, and this is not accurate. I'm using this is some of the Masters Tour things that my account got in. You can see certain decks, cost a lot of dust, and certain decks don't cost a lot of dust or use core cards. So it's a thing of often depending on what's really cheap. So let's say, for example, there's a deck that costs, the 30 legendary deck. And let's say it happens to be a really good deck. Well, not as many players are going to be able to afford it. So what does that mean? It's less likely to be exploited. And there's also the element of like, well, let's say a deck is really, really cheap. It might be really, really popular. So that might actually make it worse because more people play it, so more people play decks that beat it. So there's a real element, or let's say you have a deck that's really, really good, but it happens to be beat by the most common deck, which is really, really cheap. So things like budget can actually affect the strength of decks and how good a deck is. And also, you might say, well, is a deck really good if I have to put 30 legendaries in it? You might say, I think it's actually a fundamental value for a deck to be affordable. Another thing that's subjective. That's another way a deck can be good. And I think the last thing I just want to quickly tell on the obvious that I said it earlier, is a deck fun? And I think not only, at the end of the day, we're playing this to have a good time. So if a deck is fun, I think that's a big qualification for it being the best deck. But also, another thing is if you're having fun with a deck, the reality is your brain is more likely to be engaged. What does this mean? You're going to learn faster. You're going to come back from mistakes. You're going to get less tilted because, well, you're having fun, but you lose. Well, you're going to be less likely tilted. But if you're playing a deck solely to win that you don't like, you're going to be more tilted. You're going to be more angry. So I think playing fun, while maybe in the short run might not increase your win rate, I think playing decks that you like in the long run will actually have more success. So remember, you're not a robot. You can't just plug in the highest win rate deck. Now, high win rate decks are a great place to start. And if you're trying to figure out what the best deck is, just go through, I would say if you're, a newer player, look through the highest win rate decks that are on a good budget. So if you can do it on an affordable budget, go ahead and do that. I think that's a really good idea. But the bottom line is, if you're sort of, those would be the biggest two criteria deciding what's the best deck for you as an individual. Go for the high win rates and go for, and then maybe the third thing would be like skill expression. So for example, if you're a very beginner player, picking something like a mech mage might be a really good choice. But if, let's say, you're a more advanced player, maybe you're, gone to legend before, I might say in this meta, go with Big Beast Hunter, because it's still, not super advanced. It's not the deck that you have to be. No, I was playing on ladder. D-Money got rank 3 legend with Big Beast Hunter. That can go all the way to the top, but it's a thing of, it's still a tempo-based deck. So it's a thing of, it's still kind of using those beginner intermediate concepts, where something like, Control Shaman or Boar Priest, or Celestial Alignment Druid kind of break the traditional rules of Hearthstone, you have to understand things at a higher level. So, that might be my current recommendation, but that, all, like I said, find things that, look relatively affordable with high win rates. That's what I would say for trying out, find what's the best deck for you, because remember, you are a human being. You can't just plug in what the best deck is for everyone. We're all individuals. So try and find a deck that's good for you. I hope these criteria can help you find what the best deck is. You might have a different definition than me, but maybe my ideas. So once again, what were the big things that I talked about? What makes decks good? Global win rates, also local win rates, between top 1,000 or diamond. Meta resiliency, is a deck meta defining or is it meta exploiting? Skill expression, playstyle, tournament viability, budget, and fun. I think those are the big 6 things that I think about when I decide what is the best deck, what is a good deck, what makes a deck good, what makes say this is a good deck. So it's not just win rates, there's a lot going on. Remember, good is subjective, so you can make a completely different definition. A good deck might be its ability to meme, it might be its ability to do something crazy. We all have different reasons. So anyways, hope you guys like this style of content and enjoy. Hey everyone, if you made it all the way to the end, chances are you really like this content, so thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it. If you want to show your support of the live content, feel free to like and subscribe. Liking and subscribing always helps the algorithm to show that you like it, so the thing is more likely to give it to other people. In addition to that, if you are always wanting a No Hands Gamer video, but some days I don't put one out because I don't know what to do, we have another channel, which is the No Hands Gamer VODs, which is the raw, unedited content from my Twitch, where you get to see everything on the YouTube format. I highly recommend you go check that out, so you can get your No Hands Gamer fix every day, even when I don't put out a normal YouTube video. Hope to see you guys in the next video.